Hi guys, David here with another science update. So today we're going to look at a paper which is getting a lot of attention because it draws a very strong connection between dietary protein intake, amino acid supplementation, and the development of neuropathologies which are related to dementia and Alzheimer's disease. The paper was published just this week in the Journal of Science Advances, and it's called Neurodegenerative Processes Accelerated by Protein Malnutrition and Decelerated by Essential Amino Acids in a Tauopathy Mouse Model. Now, I for one am typically skeptical about papers which draw a connection between some sort of dietary component and a specific biomedical outcome, because a lot of the times these papers are actually based on epidemiological studies. In other words, what they'll do is they'll have a huge data set of what people are eating, and then they'll have a correlated data set of specific health outcomes. And a lot of the times it's hard to know what the key variable is. So for example, perhaps people who eat more meat are also more likely to eat more processed food. And then if that cohort has a higher incidence of colorectal cancer, the question is, well, is it because of the processed food or is it because of the meat? And it's just really hard to know, and there's a lot of disagreements about that type of study. This study, however, is a lot simpler than that, and I think more straightforward. What they have is essentially a mouse population which is prone to develop neuropathologies which are similar to Alzheimer's disease or dementia, and they have a control group which is similar to that but is just not inclined to develop those neuropathologies. And then they have those two control groups, and they're basically feeding them different diets and observing what happens to their brains and to their gene expression. Now, the specific mouse model that they have is prone to develop problems with their NFTs, or we'll see if I can say this, their Neurofibrillary tangles, which are aggregates of what they're saying a hyperphosphorylated tau protein. And this is a common biomarker for Alzheimer's disease. And basically what it results in is a problem with the microtubules in neurons. And so we have here an image of a healthy neuron which has these microtubules, which is part of the structure of the neuron. And you can see that the stabilizing tau molecules or the tau proteins are stabilizing the microtubules. And then what happens is you have, in Alzheimer's disease, for instance, the tau protein is malformed and it does not do a good job of stabilizing the microtubules, which causes the microtubules subunits to fall apart. And that's partially because the tau proteins are actually tangling together. So that's basically like a really high level view. We're looking at mice that have this problem with their tau proteins, and we're comparing it to mice that don't have the problem with the tau proteins, and looking at how these two different mice populations deal with different diets. One of the key results of the paper is summarized in figure 1, and in particular we're going to look at figure 1D. And what we're looking at here is basically that over the course of the several month study, mice that have the tau protein problem are going to experience cortex volume loss. In other words, the part of their brain known as the cortex is going to experience degradation, whereas mice that don't have that tau protein problem are going to experience less cortex volume loss. And then we're going to also be able to observe the impact of different diets on this acceleration. And so the three different diets that we have basically are NPD, which is normal protein diet, LPD, which is low protein diet, and then also we have the variable of additional amino acid supplementation. And so looking at figure 1D up close, the first line I want to look at are the black dots, and you can see this is the non-TG. So the non-TG, that basically means the non-TG are the normal mice. So the normal mice with a normal protein diet basically experience no loss in cortex volume, right? So there's nothing wrong with them. There's no problem with their brain, and they have a normal diet. They did find that the non-TG mice with a low protein diet did experience a little bit of cortex loss, but they said this is actually not statistically significant because it's within the error bars of the normal protein diet. So it looks like maybe there's some response, like a healthy, otherwise healthy mouse. If you give it a low protein diet, it might experience some problem with its cortex. And then we have the extreme opposite of this is the TG mice. That's the mice that have the problem with their tau protein plus a low protein diet. And you can see that there is, at the end of the trial, they had 70% of their cortex volume. In other words, they lost about 30% of their cortex. However, if the TG mice with a low protein diet were also supplemented with amino acids, then the cortex volume loss was significantly less. So at the end of the trial, this cohort in blue had 85% of their cortex volume remaining. So they only lost about half as much of the cortex as did those with the low protein diet. Interestingly enough, you also find that overall, when you have the TG mice, again, these are the ones with the problem, plus a normal protein diet, also this wasn't as bad as the low protein diet. And then if these mice were supplemented with amino acids, so if you basically had a mouse cohort that was had the problem with their tau protein, had a normal protein diet, and had extra amino acids, they did pretty much the best that you could hope for mice with this particular mutation. And so by the end of the trial, that cohort in red had only lost 10% of their cortex, which is still, pretty bad, but it's way better than losing 30% of your cortex. So this is pretty interesting overall, because this data suggests that the amount of protein consumed by the mice plus amino acid supplementation, so which is basically more protein, more essential amino acids, is the same thing as kind of eating more protein, I think. That was the best bet in terms of slowing the cortex volume degradation. Now, something that I don't like about this study, and maybe you've picked up on it too, is that there's a missing experimental group here. We have mice that have the tau protein problem and mice that don't have it, and then we're given 3 different diet regimes. Basically, we have normal protein diet, we have low protein diet, and then we also have this added variable of extra amino acids. And this extra amino acid is actually a supplement from a company. And what I want to know is, why didn't they do a control group that just had a high protein diet? And what's kind of sad to me about this really good study overall is that it looks like they didn't study the impact of a high protein diet, probably because they're trying to build a case for a specific product, this amino acid supplementation product. And you can see in the competing interests that this work is partially funded by Ajinomoto company, and a lot of the researchers are actually employed by this Ajinomoto company. And looking it up, Ajinomoto company was established in 1909 and launched the crystal of essential amino acids in 1956. This company is a world leader in the production and supply of amino acids and is widely recognized as the standard of quality in amino acids for some of the world's largest food and pharmaceutical brands. And so basically there's kind of a conflict of interest that you can see. I think basically deteriorated the quality of the science by missing a key control group. And so, maybe that's controversial, I don't know, but it just seems kind of obvious, right? Like if you're looking at, hey, a low protein diet is bad, it accelerates the degradation, a normal protein diet kind of slows the degradation, then what about a high protein diet? Can't we look at a high protein diet before looking at kind of like this special product that Ajinomoto sells? It has, these essential amino acids, leucine, phenylalanine, lysine, isoleucine, histidine, valine, tryptophan, etc. Or I guess that's it. But what's interesting is that's not really different from what you get in meat. Right, so looking at some common meats, we have beef, lamb, and pork here, and we have the amino acid profiles. We have leucine, there's plenty of leucine in these common forms of meat. There's phenylalanine, there's plenty of phenylalanine, plenty of lysine, and it has all of them. So, to be fair, maybe you could argue that the amino acid formula is easier to dose. And one thing that they were talking about in the study is that people who are suffering from dementia are also less likely to eat a lot of protein, partially because it's kind of hard work to eat protein, especially if you're advanced in age and maybe you have dental issues, you can't chew a lot, so maybe that's a good argument. But I really think that in addition to having the study with the amino acids, they really should have done a study where they had just a high protein diet. I mean, it's like really a pretty big omission. And I don't mean to criticize the science overall. I think it's like really good science and I'm glad they did it. I just think it's just frustrating because I think that they could have covered those bases. It's just kind of obvious. So there's a lot more to the study, and if you're interested in this, I've included a link below, and it actually is an open access article, so you can access it with no paywall, which is great. And in particular, I think that there's some interesting tidbits in there about the relationship between spinal density and the level of protein in the mice diet, which I think is kind of interesting and might open the door for some future studies. But overall, I do think it's a really good study. I do wish they had included that high protein diet group, but I think it's pretty strong data. It looks statistically significant, at least for these mouse populations, and I think it may inform future studies to try to firm up our understanding of how the level of protein in a diet and amino acid supplementation may relate to the progression of diseases like dementia and Alzheimer's disease in people. So thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video or found it useful in any way, please like and subscribe, and I hope you'll join me soon in the future. Bye.